I started WikiLeaks to solve a very interesting problem to me, which was to know the fate of man, to know the fate of mankind.
Understand first and foremost who this man is.
World's top whistleblower.
Julian Assange.
Julian Assange.
Julian Assange.
Julian Assange.
Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who sparked a global uproar.
WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks.
This rogue organization gained notoriety for revealing the secrets of governments around the world.
By exposing crimes committed by our country.
What was exposed are the dark crimes.
He has shone a light on abuses that we didn't know about.
That the U.S. has committed.
Revealing the truth about the empire. They don't like it.
Should Julian Assange be jailed or given the Nobel Peace Prize?
You've been called a lot of names. Hero and...
Some see as a hero.
He is a hero.
I think he's a hero and he's doing the Lord's work.
And others have described as the most dangerous man in the world.
WikiLeaks walks like a hostile intelligence service?
What they did was compromise U.S. national security.
And talks like a hostile intelligence service.
The Russian government has engaged in espionage. Then they have given that information to WikiLeaks.
I love WikiLeaks.
Sex crime allegations.
Sex charges.
He has actually not been charged.
He hasn't even been charged with a crime.
What was wrong with that as a journalist?
He is a journalist.
Because he is, after all, an investigative journalist.
Not been found factually wrong in any case whatsoever.
The most accurate human being to ever live.
Well, I love reading those WikiLeaks.
I think the man is a high-tech terrorist.
Well, I wouldn't be a cyber terrorist, which he is.
Now, you know that America is the biggest terrorist organization in the world, just so you know.
How many people have the American government killed innocently, and how many has WikiLeaks?
Prosecuting publishers.
And all for publishing.
It's criminal action, criminal act.
This guy's a traitor, a treasonous.
He's a scumbag. He's right.
We're in the middle of illegal wars, and you're upset at the people exposing them?
This guy is a bad hombre.
And he has broken every law of the United States.
Is Julian Assange a martyr?
Well, not yet a martyr.
Right.
Let's keep it that way.
I think it's certainly worrying for Assange, yes, there's no doubt about it.
What's going on?
I mean, I can't believe what is going on.
Shameful.
Shock.
It's a brutish treatment of anyone who will stand up to the establishment.
This sets a dangerous precedent.
What kind of message does this send?
So this is a dark day for journalism. One of the darkest days of journalism in my lifetime.
It was a direct attack on the First Amendment.
Dangerous and troubling development.
It's a stop warning.
It was absolutely chilling.
This is the ultimate chilling effect.
This is the death knell.
The Fourth Estate is dead.
Of the First Amendment, freedom of the press.
War on the free press.
If Julian goes down, the rest of you do.
Does anybody understand this?
You could be prosecuted.
The U.S. Constitution is being torn up.
There is no recourse to the law.
No more regard to the Magna Carta or the Bill of Rights.
We don't even follow habeas corpus.
They want to keep everything secret.
Julian Assange embarrassed virtually everyone in power.
Embarrassed the US military-industrial complex. He's embarrassed the CIA.
That's really damaging to the CIA.
The CIA has ways to fuck up your life.
That's why they're going after Julian Assange.
Boy, they're after him big time.
The criminal prosecution of telling the truth.
This is a fact that has been completely lost
This is a matter that's gone beyond anything I'm aware of.
What would you say about the Pentagon Papers?
This is much, much bigger.
And to think that this case is not politicized, I think ignores the fact.
All these charges.
They've just trumped up all these charges.
That is not something that I can forgive.
All the other stuff about bail skipping.
Concocted.
It is not something that I can forget.
They're trying to make an example.
Look what they did to Julian Assange. We can do it to you.
If you can't protect me, there's no First Amendment. There's no press.
Get out from under the thumb and say no.
Should Julian Assange fear for his own safety?
Very much so.
Assange should be assassinated.
For what?
This is not going to be a fair trial. You know that.
Way to save his life.
I think it's a great danger to us all.
And he said, I told you so.
That's what this is about.
This is absolute madness.
And I have to tell you, the pictures are shocking from London today.
Just a few months ago, most people had never heard of a website called WikiLeaks or of its mysterious and eccentric founder, Julian Assange.
Julian Assange has fame, notoriety, and some very powerful enemies.
They say that telling the truth is no way to win friends.
Oh, what do they say?
Both have managed to rattle the worlds of journalism, diplomacy, and national security.
With his release of hundreds of thousands of pages of secret government documents and diplomatic cables.
This is somebody who has published the largest amount of American classified information in history.
Can that possibly be true? Yeah, can it possibly be true?
It is without question true that WikiLeaks is responsible for producing more journalistic scoops over the last 18 months than every single media outlet in the world combined.
They released the hacked DNC emails in the 2016 election. They exposed Pope Benedict for impeding investigations into abuse by priests.
75,000 US military logs from the war in Afghanistan. And 250,000 diplomatic cables.
And they revealed that Kim Jong-un had a secret neck removal surgery. So, for a decade, governments of the world have tried to shut WikiLeaks down.
People who have said they wanted to kill Julian Assange in America. Here are just some of those people.
High-tech terrorists.
Cyber terrorism.
Information terrorism.
Shut it down.
We're going to hang you.
We use a drone or something.
A bullet in the brain.
Illegally shoot the son of a...
Born in Townsville, he attended more than 30 schools. His nomadic existence unavoidable as his mother toured her small theatre company to keep the family afloat.
Julian Paul Assange was born on July 3, 1971, in Queensland, Australia.
At 13, he got his hands on his first computer.
At the age of 16, he started hacking under the name Mendax.
He broke into some of the world's most secure government and military systems.
In the early 1990s, Assange was charged with illegally accessing information from the computer systems of several organizations. However, he was released on good conduct after paying a small fine.
I started to see the behavior of these military organizations, and what I saw I didn't like.
He began programming and developing free software in 1994.
You started to become an activist, I guess.
It set the seeds.
Those first seeds grew into WikiLeaks, an organization that would soon shake the foundations of governments around the world.
If you get this material, give it to us, no questions asked, and you'll help change history.
What people care about is power. However, information is power. We take information from the most powerful organizations and we put it in the public record.
To his admirers, he became a champion of free speech and transparency. In the US, he is seen as a threat to national security.
In fact, in 2010, WikiLeaks posted a report that revealed the U.S. Department of Defense was discussing the prevention of leaks by the organization.
This disclosure is an attack on the international community.
But it was then his personal life that put him at the centre of an international drama that's run for years.
Swedish authorities have issued an arrest warrant for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. He's accused of rape and molestation.
Sweden issued a warrant for the arrest of Julian Assange
on suspicion of molestation and rape.
Assange's life took a serious twist when the Swedish press announced police wanted to question him over the rape of 2 young women.
Assange was in Stockholm last week announcing the further publication of 15,000 reports.
So what exactly is going on? The first publication of the diplomatic leaks known as Cablegate had begun to take place.
WikiLeaks recently revealed thousands of secret documents about American forces in Afghanistan.
Disclosures like these tear at the fabric of responsible government.
We're looking at all of the things that we can do to stem the flow of this information.
It was in this climate, on August 11, 2010, that he arrived in Sweden to give a lecture at the Swedish Christian Social Democrat organization. An appearance partly arranged by a woman whom we shall call Miss A. Reports suggest that they arranged in advance that he would stay in her apartment, and the two are alleged to have had sex. Julian Assange allegedly had sex with another woman. We'll call her Miss W. On August 19, Miss W and Miss A managed to get in contact with each other and allegedly share concerns they have about aspects of their respective sexual encounters.
Whatever happened between Assange and the women, the allegations against him were a gift to the US government.
The actual charges themselves, nobody knows if they're right or wrong. I find it to be a wild coincidence that they came at the same exact time that there was the massive WikiLeaks revelations about the US and other governments all across the world.
This is purely and simply politics at play. Not 2 women who feel that there's been an injustice.
On August 20, Miss A accompanies Miss W to the Klara police station in central Stockholm.
The case against Assange began when the women with whom he'd had sex went to police seeking to have him tested for sexually transmitted diseases.
Miss A, it is alleged, had gone along primarily to support Miss W. It turns out that she knew the police officer on duty at the time. What is unusual, however, is that contrary to police protocol in virtually every developed country, including Sweden, the interrogation had been neither audio recorded nor video recorded.
Are you any clearer about why the women you met in Sweden have made their allegations?
Well, they haven't made their allegations. That's incorrect.
Sometime during Miss W's questioning, the police announced that Assange was to be arrested and questioned about possible rape and molestation. Upon hearing this, it is alleged that Miss W became so distraught that she refused to give any more testimony and even refused to sign what had been taken down.
In the Supreme Court, in the High Court, unanimity on it, that they asked for advice about STDs and the police then took that.
Without being notified of the charges or even being given an opportunity to respond, an arrest warrant was then issued for Julian Assange.
The case has been politicized. They say that they were never intending to file charges. There are no charges.
Let me also remind everybody that he has actually not been charged in Sweden. They are investigating, and the police would like to talk to Julian Assange about those sex charges.
Although the prosecutor's office might not have contacted Assange, within hours they let the whole of Sweden know what was going on, leaking to the Expressen tabloid the statements of Miss A and Miss W.
I can't tell you what it's like to wake up one day and see millions of websites saying that you are a rapist.
The newspaper front page read, "Assange hunted for rape in Sweden."
To wake up one morning and to see Swedish tabloids reporting that there was a manhunt a manhunt for a double violent rapist.
On August 21, a more senior prosecutor dismissed the rape allegations, leaving only the lesser accusation of molestation. That day, however, Miss A gets a follow-up call from the police, allegedly leading the police to believe that she just might have a used condom still lying around from a week earlier. This condom has since been tested and found to lack any traces of Julian Assange's genomic DNA. On August 30, Assange willingly went to the police and made a statement.
He has always cooperated with the Swedish investigation. He remained in Sweden to answer questions. We offered his testimony before they sought his extradition, and we continued to offer his testimony.
During the interview, he expressed his fears that anything he said would end up in the tabloid newspaper Expressen, to which the interviewing officer replied, "The interview was leaked."
And the very fact that his name was leaked to the press from the very first day was very unusual in Sweden. So this entire case from top to bottom really has been turned upside down.
On September 1, 2010, Swedish Director of Prosecution Marianne says she is reopening the rape investigation against Mr. Assange.
Are we sure that these charges are actually real, because they were dropped at one time?
The prosecutor's office brought up the charges, dropped them the next day, and then several weeks later brought them up again.
What follows is a brief timeline of events since the reopening of the investigation. On September 15, the prosecutor told Assange he was permitted to leave Sweden, which he soon does and travels to London.
In November 2010, WikiLeaks began publishing over 250,000 diplomatic cables from American embassies around the globe. Around the same time, Swedish police issued a warrant for Assange's arrest and extradition from Britain.
Wild coincidence!
On November 18, Stockholm District Court approves a request to detain Mr. Assange for questioning on suspicion of rape, sexual molestation, and unlawful coercion.
There are people like Michael Moore and Ron Paul, political opposites, who think the secret U.S. documents should be made available to the public.
Everybody knows you are a very strong advocate of freedom of speech. That has got nothing to do with what he's done in WikiLeaks, has it? These allegations of sex crimes.
Yeah, I'm sure it has absolutely nothing to do with any of that. Are you kidding me?
The prosecutor says that Julian Assange has not been available for questioning. Mr. Assange's British lawyer says his client offered to be interviewed at the Swedish Embassy in London or Scotland Yard or via video link. Marianne stated, however, that according to circumstances in the investigation, that Julian Assange be present within Sweden for questioning. Curiously, however, she refused to explain just what those circumstances happened to be.
Just want to understand how you can justify the claim that you are treating him like anybody else.
Vi särbehandlar honom inte när det gäller det sätt vi arbetar med utredning.
On November 20, Swedish police issue an international arrest warrant for Mr. Assange via Interpol. 10 days later, Interpol issues a red notice for Mr. Assange.
WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been arrested in England on behalf of Swedish authorities. He was not brought in on charges related to his contentious work, but on sexual allegations.
On December 8, the WikiLeaks founder gives himself up to London police and is taken to an extradition hearing.
In 2010, Julian Assange found himself in a prison van and then in court after Sweden issued an arrest warrant, hoping to question him over allegations made by 2 Swedish women of sexual assault. Allegations he denies.
He's remanded in custody pending another hearing on December 14.
If he were any other just normal Brit with the so-called crime that he's been accused of, which I understand wouldn't actually be a crime if it was committed in Britain.
He was cornered, quite frankly, when you see that, for example, he's been arrested in the United Kingdom, but he's broken the British law.
We've lived long enough through enough of this kind of deception, these kinds of dirty tricks that governments and corporations play.
But the rumors going around London anyway is that perhaps the Americans, and people mention the CIA, is involved with making sure that the 2 ladies that have brought these accusations may be in the pay of the CIA.
It's just absurd, and it looks bad on Britain, frankly, too, that your court systems are somehow being played by another government, which is probably in cahoots with my government.
What kind of support can he count on from Australia? He is Australian.
Well, the difficulty is that probably none at all. Not legally, not politically, most certainly not politically.
Julian Assange remains in custody while Swedish authorities try to convince the British to extradite him on rape charges.
Julian Assange is back in a London court this morning to fight extradition to Sweden. Assange arrived in a van under heavy security. Earlier, he was asked about his decision to publish secret U.S. documents. Assange says he has no regrets. He said, quote, "My convictions are unfaltering. I remain true to the ideals I have expressed." Assange relayed that message to his mother, who visited him in prison.
He's being held in the basement of the prison, right in the middle of the prison in solitary confinement.
He hasn't even been charged with a crime. He hasn't been charged with anything. And what is he doing sitting in a jail tonight?
As a mother, I'm asking the world to stand up for my brave son.
Soon, to his supporters' delight, he was out on bail.
Well, it's great to smell fresh air of London again.
Under his bail conditions, he lived in this manor house in Norfolk, owned by a friend.
Holed up on this bucolic 600-acre English estate with an ankle bracelet, a 10 o'clock curfew, and a slow internet connection. He has not been charged and proclaims his innocence. Well, I suppose if you have to be under house arrest, there could be worse places.
Well, it's a gilded cage. It's still a cage.
For more than 500 days, Julian Assange and his legal team fought his extradition through the Magistrates' Court, to the High Court, and on to the Supreme Court.
To the highest court in the land. But eventually, in 2012, he lost.
His appeal against extradition is accordingly dismissed.
There's been an extraordinary twist in the Julian Assange saga.
In an extraordinary twist to the WikiLeaks story.
A dramatic new turn in the case of the world's top whistleblower.
Julian Assange
is seeking political asylum in Ecuador.
At Ecuador's embassy in London.
Julian Assange arrived here in the afternoon in London at the Ecuadorian embassy
and sought diplomatic sanctuary and political asylum.
Well, we're told that he is still inside this embassy here. We're not getting a lot of information on the ground. His supporters even were caught by surprise by this move.
Well, there wasn't long left to go until Assange would have been handing himself over to the British authorities and then would have faced extradition to Sweden.
The WikiLeaks founder is trying to avoid extradition to Sweden.
Faced sex charges.
Sex crime allegations.
We saw at the end of last month the UK Supreme Court reject his appeal against extradition to Sweden.
His supporters say he feared it was the beginning of the end.
Assange has repeatedly claimed the case is politically motivated and being driven by Washington.
He believes it's a ploy to have him sent to the US.
Julian Assange believes the United States has already indicted him for divulging state secrets, although there's been no confirmation of that.
Now, there are growing suspicions that the US has prepared an indictment against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Washington has for years refused to officially confirm or deny whether it has done so.
Last night he sought refuge in a friendly country.
So, do I think he's right in trying to seek asylum in Ecuador? Yeah.
This is a last desperate effort because he is a political prisoner, but I hope the Ecuador government gives him his asylum.
He should do everything within his means to make sure that he's not brought here to the U.S. because apparently we don't follow the rule of law anymore.
Julian Assange has told them that his own country, Australia, is not protecting him and won't stop his eventual extradition to a country that has the death penalty. This appears to refer to the US.
He faces the realistic prospect that he'll be thrown in jail in Sweden until the Americans get their hands on him.
He made a statement, and it said that in that we know that he made note to his home country, that's Australia, saying that they were ignoring their obligations to protect a citizen that had been persecuted politically.
It is shameful that it's got to the stage that an Australian citizen feels that they have to seek the protection of Ecuador because the Australian government is not doing enough to ensure their safety.
Today, the government was denying accusations it had sat on its hands, resulting in Julian Assange having to take drastic measures.
Yesterday, the Australian Prime Minister releasing a statement saying that Australia continues to offer consular support, but clearly that wasn't enough of a guarantee for Assange or his legal team.
He's received more consular assistance than any other Australian in a comparable period.
It surprises me that he would think that Ecuador would provide him with better protection.
Well, the Ecuadorians have said that they will review this process properly. They're going to speak to the US, the UK, the Swedish governments, no talk of dealing with the Australian government at all, and then they'll make a decision.
It
is a very delicate matter, and I believe that it is important the government of Ecuador analyses, evaluates and studies the application.
Now, the Ecuadorian embassy's released a statement saying that they're evaluating his request, and so a bit of a waiting game now whilst we see what the response to that is.
While Ecuador does have an extradition treaty with the United States, it doesn't include those wanted on political charges. Earlier this year, the rapport between Assange and the country's president, Rafael Correa, was evident in an interview he did on his television show.
Thank you, President Correa.
It's been a pleasure to meet you, Julian, at least in this way. And cheer up. Welcome to the club of the persecuted.
Thank you. Take care.
Now, in that statement he made, he'd also talked of the investigations for political crimes in the US and a country where the death penalty is still in force. So perhaps that gives you some idea of what was going through Julian Assange's mind when he took that step.
Don't get assassinated.
Thank you. That's something we have to avoid every day.
What are the chances he'll receive protection from Ecuador, actually?
The Ecuadorians later put out a statement confirming that he was inside and was then under their protection.
While the department assesses Mr. Assange's application, Mr. Assange will remain at the embassy, under the protection of the Ecuadorian government.
Now, this has been a long old legal battle. 18 months Julian Assange and his team have been fighting that.
The Ecuadorian government is defending its right to protect Assange, and we have decided to grant political asylum to him. The UK government should respect the decision of the Ecuadorian government, and we trust that the UK will offer the necessary guarantees.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're disappointed by the statement by Ecuador's foreign minister today that Ecuador has offered political asylum to Julian Assange.
Will not allow Mr. Assange safe passage out of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom does not accept the principle of diplomatic asylum.
He's now been holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for more than a year.
Julian Assange has staked everything on taking refuge inside the Ecuadorian embassy.
This past week, American soldier Bradley Manning, who leaked the military and diplomatic files to WikiLeaks, was found guilty of espionage.
A military judge has now sentenced Army Private Bradley Manning to 35 years in prison for leaking hundreds of thousands of classified military and diplomatic documents to WikiLeaks. It was the largest leak of military secrets in American history. Bradley Manning was convicted on 20 of 22 charges: espionage, theft, fraud.
He's never going to see the light of day. He's going to go away for, the rest of his life.
The prosecution had wanted 60 years. He faced a maximum of 9 years, but the judge gave him 35 years. He had apologized last week.
Quote, "I only wanted to help people, not hurt people," the Army private said.
We knew he was going to spend decades in jail, but what was really unclear to us was whether the judge felt that she needed to send a message to him.
Julian Assange fears he's next in line. Now, under heavy guard, his world has shrunk to just a few small rooms. Do you feel you're imprisoned?
I'm a bit institutionalized.
He's been holed up in this embassy here. This is not an apartment building. This is a tiny little office. on one little part of this one floor.
There are police who have sight of every window in the embassy.
That is extraordinary.
Including in the interior firewalls. They hide behind the toilet window.
This does seem a little over the top. Outside, there is an extraordinary police presence 24 hours a day, ready to pounce should Julian Assange try to escape. There are police at the front door. Inside at the entrance of the embassy, even more police. There is a communications van just across the road. And around the corner here, there are more. There is even a police officer stationed inside that glass stairwell. The conviction of Bradley Manning this week has meant it's more likely than ever that Assange, indeed all publishers and journalists, could be prosecuted for exposing government secrets. Which means Julian Assange is unlikely to be walking out of this embassy anytime soon.
Hi, this is Michael Moore. I'm standing here outside the Ecuadorian embassy, where inside that Julian Assange has been under siege, seeking asylum for nearly 4 years now. I just came out from visiting him for a couple of hours, and I have to say, this is absolute madness.
The Australian Federal Police is going to provide the government with some advice about potential criminal conduct of the individual involved.
The former Prime Minister Julia Gillard has not been a supporter of you at all. Do you know?
I think that's putting it mildly. What I cannot understand is the craven behaviour of the Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard. It is embarrassing.
Hello, I'm from the Australian Government. Since Mr Assange is our citizen, we feel compelled to state in the strongest possible terms that we're America's bitch too. That's why both of these bungstains will leave him up shit creek without a paddle. After all, we're the same dickholes who are prosecuting whistleblowers and banning encryption to make it harder for journalists to expose our shit fuckery.
It is time Julia Gillard stopped sucking up to power and started using the power that she has to the benefit of the Australian people.
That this individual who was responsible for informing us, the American people, of the lies that our government told us, things we never would have known had not WikiLeaks put the truth out there.
This time last year, Julia Gillard commissioned an absurd whole-of-government task force against us, comprising of ASIO, ASIS, the Department of Defence, the Attorney General's Office and the Australian Federal Police.
It's just wrong. It's shameful. We're Americans. We don't believe in captivity of anyone, right? Without charges or trial. Or the man hasn't been charged with anything.
The Prime Minister falsely stated that WikiLeaks had acted illegally. The AFP had to take the embarrassing role of correcting her.
Well, what
it's hard to imagine that there being a worse Prime Minister.
So if Tony Abbott was the Prime Minister, that wouldn't be good either for you.
It wouldn't be good for anyone.
This is wrong, and the United States should stop this. President Obama, if you see this, come on.
You never contemplated how to escape? If I backed a van up here tonight and said, Julian, jump in, I reckon we can get you out.
That might be interesting.
Sweden, come on. You're Sweden, for Christ's sake. Let's stop this.
We were going to do something in Christmas, but better not to for a variety of reasons, but of bringing in 12 Santas and then taking 13 out.
He can laugh about it, but if Assange leaves this building, he'll be arrested and put on a plane to Sweden, where he fears the authorities there will hand him over to the US government.
Let's let him out of this prison, a 4-year prison. His crime was to tell us the truth. That's not supposed to be a crime.
Sweden has dropped the sexual assault allegations against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange.
The charges were dropped effectively because he was in the embassy.
Fearing that once extradited to Sweden, he would then be sent to the United States where we would go fucking Game of Thrones on him.
The rape investigation dropped in 2017 because they couldn't formally notify him of the allegations. 2 molestation charges dropped in 2015 because time had run out.
I have today decided to lift the decision remanding Julian Assange to custody in absentia and to recall the European arrest warrant.
And let's not forget that he actually answered questions of the prosecutors years ago, and that was when they decided to drop the investigation in Sweden. He offered his testimony and they decided to drop the case.
This was 2017, on the day the Swedish investigation against him was dropped because prosecutors couldn't pursue the case in his absence.
Today is an important victory.
The Swedish prosecutors came inside the Ecuadorian embassy to ask him questions about the case. He gave his testimony, and after that they chose to close the investigation. This is a fact that has been completely lost.
But it by no means erases 7 years of detention without charge.
Think about what happens. He is a journalist. I can't say this enough. If you can charge him with espionage or stealing.
7 years without charge. Why my children grew up without me. That is not something that I can forgive. It is not something that I can forget.
And there's also a question, did he steal this information? Did he copy the information? Those are big differences. Did the statutes of limitation already run?
Because the reality is, detention and extradition without charge has become a feature of the European Union.
This is the death knell of the First Amendment, freedom of the press. Does anybody understand this?
Celebrities, activists and politicians have put their names to an online open letter addressed to Donald Trump.
Short but sweet, I should say. It calls on President Trump to close the grand jury investigation into Julian Assange and his WikiLeaks staff, drop any charges against them. And it invokes the spirit of free speech. It says that a threat to WikiLeaks work is a threat to all free journalism.
That's a threat to all journalists around the world, wherever they operate.
Does maybe Megyn Kelly or anybody, can they stop what they're doing and pay attention as to the constitutional implications?
It's been released by the Courage Foundation, which is an organisation that raises funds for the legal defence of whistleblowers, including Edward Snowden. And he's just one of the more than 750 signatories to this letter. People are signing all the time. Journalists, activists, artists, public figures, people like Noam Chomsky, the actor Pamela Anderson, film director Ken Loach, Vivienne Westwood, to name just a few.
In Sweden, indefinite detention is a policy. There is no time limit that someone can be detained without charge. That is not how we expect a civilized state to behave.
You may be asking why now. Well, it appears that the US is stepping up its attempts to get its hands on Julian Assange. The Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, just last month called it a priority.
We are going to step up our effort and already are stepping up our efforts on all leaks. This is a matter that's gone beyond anything I'm aware of. We have professionals that have been at the security business of the United States for many years that are shocked by the number of leaks.
Extradition without charge is not something that we expect from the rule of law in the United Kingdom.
If you can't protect me, there's no First Amendment, there's no press, there's no media, there's no nothing. That's what this is about.
How will this be received in the White House? Well, frankly, it's anyone's guess. Donald Trump, as we know, has something of a love-hate relationship with WikiLeaks. He loves them for leaking Hillary Clinton's emails, but he hates them for pretty much everything else.
It's criminal action, criminal act.
No response from President Trump yet on Twitter, but we know that this is a president who is notorious for changing his mind.
How can it be that a journalist and publisher operating from Europe can be extradited to the United States? We don't operate in the United States. We don't publish from the United States.
U.S. has refused to speak to Julian Assange except under duress, under harsh conditions, possibly after solitary confinement, which shows that they don't want to know what Julian Assange knows. They don't want to interrupt their narrative with what could be facts.
Okay, that's it. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
But Julian Assange stayed on inside the embassy, fearing that if he was arrested for skipping bail in the UK, he could be extradited to the US.
And now that the allegations have been dropped, the government of Ecuador said they expect safe passage for Assange to Ecuador. The only problem is the United States has never given a shit what Ecuador expects, all right?
Ecuador has announced that whistleblower Julian Assange will eventually have to leave the country's embassy in London. The announcement was made by the Ecuadorian leader, Lenin Moreno, who is reportedly in discussions with British officials over a deal to hand the Australian over to police.
WikiLeaks says that a high-level source within the Ecuadorian state has confirmed that Australian Julian Assange will be expelled within hours to days from the Ecuadorian embassy in London.
Look, we're hearing that Ecuador has said this situation can't go on forever. We're now in talks with the British authorities. Many people see that as bad news for Assange.
WikiLeaks has sent out a second tweet saying they have had this information from a second high-level source.
I think it's certainly worrying for Assange, yes, there's no doubt about it, because the incoming president in Ecuador seems to see him as a problem.
Relations between Mr. Assange and his hosts have badly soured. While he was inside, Ecuador had a change of government, and the now president described him as a stone in the shoe.
Hoy anuncio que la conducta irrespetuosa y agresiva del señor Julian Assange, las declaraciones descorteses y amenazantes de su organización aliada en contra del Ecuador y, sobre todo, la transgresión de los convenios internacionales han llevado la situación a un punto en que el asilo del señor Assange es insostenible e inviable.
Now they come off the back, of course, of allegations from the Ecuadorian president, who himself is facing a lot of pressure at home in relation to allegations of corruption offshore.
He's also under pressure from the Americans and from the International Monetary Fund to raise funding for his country, and apparently it's been speculated, reported, there have been threats that this might be withheld if he does not resolve the Assange case.
This has been the result of long negotiations between the British government, the Ecuadorian government, and the US government.
He has alleged that WikiLeaks has been hacking the phones in the embassy. That has then sparked, I think, this latest tweet from WikiLeaks.
You know, at any moment they could just chuck him out of the embassy. That's the problem. And of course he will be arrested by the British authorities because of the bail conditions that he broke. I think the problem then is, will Britain bow to the pressures from the USA to have him extradited to the USA to stand trial under who knows what conditions?
Should Julian Assange fear for his own safety?
Very much so, as seen by supporters of WikiLeaks. The fact is, Lenin Moreno's government has been the one that's responsible for the cutting off of his internet.
Julian Assange has certain inalienable rights under the Ecuadorian constitution, and the Ecuadorian government has a duty of care towards him as a citizen of their country.
But let's bear in mind that Assange not only has been given political asylum, and that was sifted over and weighed up legally for weeks before Ecuador did this. So, you know, the case is strong. But he's also now an Ecuadorian citizen.
We saw reports surfacing from Quito which said that he had received a national identity number. So he's been entered into the tax register, essentially, which is something that will only happen to citizens.
And under the asylum rules and conventions, a state that has granted asylum should do nothing to further jeopardise the refugee's status or position.
Ecuadorians try to give him a status as a diplomat too.
The UK Foreign Office has refused a request from Ecuador to grant Assange diplomatic immunity. In a letter to us, the FCO stressed that it would not discuss the matter.
So to hand him over to the Brits to face justice for jumping bail, sure, you know, he might get 1 year in prison maximum, but I think he's right to be worried about being extradited onwards to the United States, where his organisation WikiLeaks has already been categorised by Michael Pompeo
like a hostile intelligence service.
Politicians have been calling for his assassination, for the death penalty, for the rest of his life in prison.
Assange should be assassinated, actually.
Illegally shoot the son of a...
And that neo-McCarthyist absolute hysteria, calling for my assassination, calling for the kidnapping of our staff, putting bills into Congress to declare all our staff enemy combatants that could be assassinated at will.
There's speculation that even though he's an Australian who's never actually had much to do with America, that he would be prosecuted under the American Espionage Act. I mean, this is the sort of completely off the scale.
If you know these people, when they consider something as that serious, then all options are on the table.
And all for publishing.
It's beyond the pale because now you're not just prosecuting whistleblowers with the Espionage Act, you're actually prosecuting publishers.
And over the decade of the WikiLeaks existence, they have not been found factually wrong in any case whatsoever.
You have no doubt that if you
step outside... My lawyers have no doubt. The view of my US lawyers is that there is already a sealed indictment, and we must behave like that assumption is correct.
There's a rumor here in Washington of long-standing that he will be charged with espionage in the Eastern District of Virginia Federal Court, which is known as the Espionage Court. If this happens, it's truly a very dangerous and troubling development.
The UN ruled that Assange should actually be allowed to go free, but that always seems to be ignored whenever it's brought up with the UK or US authorities.
Now, the politics of the case with respect to Ecuador changed with the change of government, with Lenin Moreno coming to power. And ever since then, inside the embassy, it's become more and more difficult, to the point where even Human Rights Watch said it was akin to solitary confinement.
And the UN does see that what he's been forced to live in the Ecuadorian embassy is cruel and unusual punishment. And for what?
So on both the count of citizenship and asylum, it would be an extraordinary decision by Ecuador to evict him from the embassy. That would be pretty much unprecedented.
Ecuador, soberanamente, da por finalizado el asilo diplomático otorgado al señor Assange en el año 2012.